The ball sat 3 feet from the cup, a clean line with barely any break, and Tony knew he'd make it before he even set his putter behind it. One smooth stroke. The ball rolled true, caught the left lip, and dropped with that satisfying rattle. 1 over par on the 18th. Not his best hole, but good enough. 1 over on this one, that leaves me at 2 under for the day. Tony pulled his ball from the cup and turned to his friend waiting on the edge of the green. "Where are you sitting, Marco?" Marco was already crouching behind his ball, reading the green like it owed him money. 9 feet, slight right-to-left break. The kind of putt that separated the guys who played every weekend from the guys who just said they did. "If I sink this for birdie, I'll be even after 18. Marco didn't look up. He had that look he always got when a score mattered to him. Jaw tight, eyes narrow, like the ball had personally offended him. Tony glanced over at Jack, who was standing off to the side with his arms crossed, his ball sitting in the rough just short of the green. Jack's body language said everything his mouth hadn't yet. "And what about you, Jack? Weren't you 2 over last time I checked?" "Yeah, but I screwed up my approach shot, pulled it left into that garbage." Jack gestured toward the thick rough like it was responsible. "I'm looking at 3 over probably. I'll wait for Marco to clear out first." Marco stood, settled into his stance, and took his stroke. The ball tracked beautifully for the first 6 feet, then broke a touch too early, sliding past the right edge of the cup by an inch. He stared at the miss like it had insulted his mother. "That green's running faster than it should be," Marco muttered. "Or you misread it," Tony offered, grinning. "I never misread putts. The grass moved." "The grass moved, that's your excuse." "It's not an excuse, it's a meteorological observation." Tony shook his head, still smiling, as Marco tapped in for par. This was how it always went on Sunday mornings at Stone Creek Golf Club. The 3 of them trading shots and insults in equal measure, burning through 18 holes before the Arizona sun got serious about punishing anyone stupid enough to be standing in the open past noon. Antonio Ramirez, Tony to everyone who knew him, was 34 years old, a carpenter by trade, and currently enjoying the only truly peaceful hours his week had to offer. Sunday morning golf with his 2 best friends in Paradise Valley, a suburb of Phoenix where the fairways stayed green through sheer human stubbornness and an obscene water bill. Jack O'Brien was 33, fellow carpenter, and had been Tony's closest friend since Tony started on the crew 5 years ago. Jack was the kind of guy who'd lend you his truck without asking why, then give you grief about the gas for the next 6 months. Steady, loyal, occasionally blunt to a fault. And Marco DeLuca, the youngest at 30, was their resident electrician, part-time comedian, and full-time pursuer of anything in a skirt. Good-looking enough to get away with it, charming enough to make the aftermath someone else's problem. They'd all met on the building site, working under Tony's older brother Carlos, who ran their crew and ran it tight. Carlos hadn't come along today. Sunday was the one day his wife Jenna got a break from their 2 kids, both under 3, and Carlos took diaper duty seriously, even if he complained about it loudly to anyone who'd listen. After Jack chipped on and 2-putted for bogey, the 3 of them pulled their carts toward the clubhouse, the conversation shifting the way it always did when the last ball dropped, from golf to food and beer. "Kristen's already in the restaurant," Jack said, pulling out his phone. "She finished her round about 20 minutes ago. Remind me to thank her for being our designated driver. It means I get to actually drink today," Marco replied, already walking faster at the mention of lunch. "She's playing with a friend of hers today too, just so you know." Jack delivered this casually, but Tony caught the sideways glance aimed in his direction. "So, she's always playing with someone." Tony kept walking. They grabbed a table in the club restaurant, ordered burgers and beers, and settled into that comfortable post-round slump where everything felt earned. The cold beer, the shade, the knowledge that the hardest thing any of them would do for the rest of the day was decide between watching football or taking a nap. Marco was 2 sips into his beer when he spotted them. "So, Jack, who's the hot blonde with Kristen today?" Tony looked up despite himself. 2 women were crossing the restaurant toward them. Jack's fiancée, Kristen, dark-haired and smiling with that purposeful walk she had, and beside her, a woman Tony hadn't seen before. Blonde hair catching the light, fit, pretty face, moving with the kind of easy confidence that suggested she wasn't trying to impress anyone and managed it anyway. That's Sienna, Jack said, taking a calm sip of his beer. She works at the florist downstairs from Kristen's accounting firm, but I don't think she'd be your type, Marco. She's not into clubbing or dating apps apparently. Hey, what can I say? I'm an equal opportunity kind of guy. As long as they're hot, I'll give them a shot. Marco laughed at his own declaration. Jack set his beer down and looked directly at Tony. I think she's way more suited to you though, Tony, and I think Kristen may have brought her along today with meeting you in mind. There it was, the setup. Tony had suspected it the moment Jack mentioned Kristen was playing with a friend, and now the confirmation landed like a golf ball in a sand trap. Nah, I'm good. I don't need help in that area. Tony kept his voice even casual. Yeah, he's still taking the celibacy oath to become a priest. Isn't that right, Tony? Marco prodded, grinning wide. Tony just smiled and shook his head. This wasn't new territory. The ribbing about his dating life, or total absence of one, had been a running joke among his friends for years. 8 years in Phoenix. Not a single date, not a single woman brought around, nothing. Cut him some slack, Marco. I think Sienna might be just the one to break that particular drought. Jack's smile had a warmth to it that made Tony want to change the subject immediately. Hey, I'm not a charity case. I could find a woman if I wanted to. I'm just not that interested right now. 8 years is a long time to not be interested, Tony. At some point you need to put yourself back out there again. Marco's tone shifted just slightly, something almost serious underneath the teasing. One day, maybe. Then the two women were at their table and the moment for arguing evaporated. Who won today, guys? Let me guess, Tony as usual. Kristen slid into the seat beside Jack, leaning into him with practiced ease. Yeah, but only by 2 shots. I think Marco's getting better, Jack offered. By the way, guys, this is my friend Sienna. Sienna, you already know Jack, of course. Over there is Marco, and the guy on this side is Tony. Kristen paused, her eyes bright with amusement. Be careful around Marco, though. He should change his name to Casanova or something. Geez, I'm copping it today just because I like to keep my options open. Marco laughed along because that was what Marco did, took everything in stride and turned it into a punchline. Sienna took the open seat, the one next to Tony, because of course she did. And what about you, Tony? Do I need to be careful around you as well? Sienna asked, and her voice had a directness to it that caught Tony slightly off guard. Blue eyes looking right at him, nothing coy about it. Hardly. The guy's a saint, Marco answered for him, grinning like a man who just delivered a knockout punchline. Oh, Saint Tony, huh? Sienna turned to look at him properly. He was aware, suddenly and uncomfortably, of being assessed. Tony was just over 6 feet, dark brown hair and eyes, solid build from years of swinging hammers and hauling lumber. He kept himself in shape without being obsessive about it. Sienna herself was maybe 5'6", golden blonde hair pulled back from a pretty face, those blue eyes sharp and curious. 26 maybe, 27, young either way, younger than him. Nah, I'm no saint. I just don't play the field like young Marco here. What are you talking about, Tony? You don't even get on the field, let alone play it. Marco was on a roll now, laughing at his own material. All right, enough about my dating history, or lack of. Tony shifted his weight, hoping the conversation would steer somewhere else, anywhere else. I'm sure Sienna would be more interested in talking about other things. The conversation broadened after that, work, hobbies, the usual stuff people talk about when someone new enters a circle. Sienna asked questions easily, seemed genuinely curious rather than politely going through the motions. When Tony mentioned Champ, his 3-year-old Doberman, something in her face changed, lit up. Really, I have my princess too. She's a golden retriever, turning 3 in about a month. I spend most of my weekends taking her out to socialize as well. I know exactly what you mean. There it was, that spark of recognition when two people find unexpected common ground. Tony felt it, even as he tried not to. Maybe you two should go on a puppy play date together, Kristen added, her tone a little too bright, a little too pleased with herself. Tony shrugged, nodded slightly, said nothing. I'd like that, Sienna offered. At least I'd have someone to talk to while Princess runs around with the other dogs. Silence from Tony, not hostile, not dismissive, just nothing. The offer sat there on the table between them like a tip nobody was picking up. Jack, sensing the moment dying, jumped in. Hey, we're having a house-leaving party next weekend, by the way. I expect all of you to be there. You too, Sienna. The conversation moved on. They ate. They drank another round. The afternoon unfolded the way Sunday afternoons were supposed to, unhurried, undemanding, full of the comfortable noise of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. When it came time to leave, Kristen made one more attempt. She pulled Tony aside near the exit, her voice low but direct. "You should set up a time to take the dogs to the park with Sienna. She'd really like that." Tony gave her that same half-smile, that same non-committal shrug. He didn't ask Sienna for her number, didn't arrange anything. Just said his goodbyes to everyone, got in his truck, and drove home to the 3-bedroom house he shared with Marco and 2 dogs who were always happy to see him, who never asked him to explain himself, and who never made him feel like he was disappointing anyone. The Arizona sun was dropping low by the time he pulled into the driveway, painting the sky in streaks of copper and rust. Champ was at the door before Tony even had his key out, that whole-body wiggle that Dobermans do when their person comes home, all muscle and barely contained joy. "Hey, buddy. Yeah, I missed you too." Tony dropped onto the couch with Champ's head on his thigh, the house quiet around him. He thought about Sienna's blue eyes, about the way she'd said "I'd like that" without any games or pretense. He thought about the fact that he hadn't even been able to say yes to a walk in the park. Then he turned on the TV, scratched behind Champ's ears, and stopped thinking about it entirely. The following Saturday, Tony stood on Jack and Kristen's front porch with a 6-pack of craft beer and the distinct feeling that he was walking into an ambush. Jack opened the door and immediately looked down at the beer. "Good to see you here, Tony, but are you planning on an early night with only a 6-pack? "Yeah, I got stuff to do tomorrow morning. Taking it easy tonight." "All right, go put them in the fridge." Jack stepped aside to let him in, then added, casual as a hand grenade, "By the way, Sienna's already here, just thought you should know." Tony stopped in the hallway. "Are you and Kristen seriously trying to set me up with her, or what?" Jack didn't even have the decency to look apologetic. "Of course we are. You can't seem to get the job done on your own, apparently." "Yeah, whatever." Tony shook his head and made his way toward the kitchen, where Kristen intercepted him before he could reach the fridge. "I'll take those, Tony. You go mingle a bit." She lifted the 6-pack from his hands with a smile that was all sweetness and zero subtlety. "Maybe go talk to Sienna. She's here somewhere, too." He shook his head again, cornered. That's what this felt like, gentle, well-meaning, suffocating. Every person in his life seemed to have collectively decided that what Tony needed was a woman, and they'd found one, and now all he had to do was cooperate, like it was that simple. He heard his brother's voice coming from the backyard and felt a flicker of surprise. Carlos wasn't supposed to be here tonight. Tony grabbed a beer from someone else's cooler and stepped out through the sliding glass door. "Carlos, I didn't think you'd show up. What about the kids?" Carlos Ramirez was 2 years older, 2 inches shorter, and carried the slightly harassed look of a man raising 2 children under 3. His wife Jenna stood somewhere across the yard talking with a cluster of other women. Carlos was leaning against the patio railing with a beer, looking like a man who'd been temporarily released from prison. "Got her mom in as a sitter for a few hours. Jenna's here somewhere too." Carlos took a sip. "I think she's off talking with Kristen's friend, Sienna." "Oh, great. Now she'll be hassling me too." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Hassling you with what?" "Sienna, Jack and Kristen are already both trying to set us up together." "And what's wrong with that?" Carlos turned to face his brother directly. "Have you actually seen her, by the way? You'd be lucky if she was even interested in you to begin with. She might be out of your league." "Yeah, we met last Sunday at golf. She's nice." "So what's with the act that you'd be put out or something? Go ask her out. You need to do something, sooner or later." Tony took a slow drink of his beer, staring out at the yard. The party was maybe 30 people, good music from a Bluetooth speaker, ticky torches just starting to matter as the sun dropped, the smell of grilled food, and the low, comfortable murmur of friends who'd known each other for years. "I don't know. She's nice and all, but I'm not sure if I want to deal with all that." Carlos set his beer down on the railing. His expression shifted, still brotherly, but with an edge now. "Look, I know Rosa did a real number on you, but not every woman is like that. At some point you need to let someone back in again, and it might as well be Sienna. Just start somewhere, anywhere." The name hit Tony the way it always did, a quick tightening behind his ribs, a reflex he couldn't train out of himself no matter how many years passed. Rosa, his ex-wife. The woman who had methodically dismantled his ability to trust another human being and then had the audacity to try to keep billing him for the privilege. All right, I'll think about it. But I'd prefer if everyone just let me figure it out on my own rather than pushing someone onto me. We gave you 8 years, Tony. You haven't been figuring it out on your own, have you? Tony didn't answer. Carlos let the silence sit for a moment, then softened. Look, the people that care about you are just trying to help. That's all. If you really don't want to go out with Sienna, then don't. Yeah, okay. How did you go with the suppliers for Monday, by the way? All sorted. Carlos almost laughed. Nice deflection there, asking about work. But yeah, we're good for 8 a.m. His eyes moved to something over Tony's shoulder and his expression warmed. Hey, look who's coming outside. Go over and say hello at least. Tony turned. Jenna was stepping through the sliding door with Sienna beside her, both carrying drinks, both mid-conversation. Sienna was wearing a simple dress, nothing dramatic, just well-chosen, and her golden hair was down around her shoulders. She looked effortlessly pretty in that way some women managed without seeming to realize it. Tony walked over, gave Jenna a hug and a kiss on the cheek, then turned to Sienna. I didn't know you two knew each other as well. We just met tonight, actually. Jenna's been nice enough to introduce me to everyone while Kristen is getting the food ready. Sienna's smile was easy, warm. And speaking of which, Jenna cut in, already backing away, I need to go check on your brother to make sure he's not drinking too much. Can you two please excuse me for a moment? She was gone before either of them could respond. Subtle as a sledgehammer, that one. Tony and Sienna stood together in the ambient noise of the party, two people suddenly alone in a crowd. Tony's mind went momentarily blank, that particular kind of blankness that happens when you know you should say something but every possible sentence feels wrong. Did you just get here too? He managed. About 30 minutes ago. I'm thankful that Jenna's been kind enough to look after me. That's good. Tony nodded, then reached for the only topic that felt safe. How's Princess doing? Is she home alone or is someone with her? She's home alone at the moment, same for Champ. He's got another dog at home. Marco's got a Jack Russell named JR, 4 years old. The two of them play tag around the backyard all day long. We've got a big yard so they keep themselves busy. That's good. They need companionship too, just like us. Sienna said it plainly without loading it, and somehow that made it land harder. They talked about their dogs, about living situations, Tony with Marco, Sienna with her older sister and the sister's boyfriend who were almost never around. And then Tony asked the question before his brain could talk him out of it. How old are you? Sorry if you don't mind me asking. I'm 26. And you? 34, although I'm surprised Kristen didn't already tell you that. She did. I just wanted to see if you'd tell me the truth or not. Tony blinked. So you don't think guys always tell the truth? No, not really. I work at a florist. A lot of the guys that come in buy flowers not just for their wives, but for their side pieces too. That, and I've met my fair share of guys like Marco before. But did you figure them out before or after they'd had their way with you? Sienna didn't flinch at the directness. Before. I learned to have a good BS meter after my only proper relationship crashed and burned. I always make guys jump through a few hoops now. That usually scares away the fakers who are only after a bit of fun. Hoops like what? Like taking our dogs to the dog park for a few hours to start with. And that works? Well, it worked with you, didn't it? Tony felt something shift, a small crack in the wall he kept around himself, letting in a sliver of light he hadn't invited. Because she was right. The idea of going to the dog park with her had sounded good to him last weekend. He just hadn't been able to say it. Hey, I never said I wouldn't take you, and besides, I'm not looking for just a bit of fun anyway, but I do actually love the idea of taking Champ to run around with Princess. So why didn't you agree to that last weekend? I gave you every opportunity and you just blew me off. Because. That's not an answer. You can at least tell me why, Tony exhaled. The party continued around them. Laughter, the clink of bottles, someone arguing about football, but in their small pocket of space, the noise seemed to recede. I don't know. Look, I haven't been out with anyone in a very long time. I'm not even sure what I should say or do at this point. So maybe I'm just a little nervous. It's easy. You just talk like what we're doing now. It's no different. Yeah, maybe. Maybe what? Does that mean you want to go to the dog park with me or not? You're not making this very easy, Tony. Why are you even interested in me anyway? Are you doing Kristen a favor? What? No, not at all. She told me there's this really nice guy named Tony that she wanted me to meet and that she knew I'd get along well with him, but that was it. Are you sure? I'm feeling like a bit of a charity case at the moment. No, my charity doesn't extend to who I might date. I'll never spend time with someone I'm not interested in, that's for sure. And you're interested in me? Maybe, but don't get too far ahead of yourself, Tony. I only said I'd like to go to the dog park with you to get to know you better. That's just the first hoop, remember? A smile played at the corners of her mouth. All right, he took a breath. Sienna, would you like to go to the dog park with me so that we can get to know each other better? Yes, I would. See, that was easy, wasn't it? Yeah, I guess so. When do you want to do this? What are you doing tomorrow afternoon? Nothing. I have stuff to do in the morning, but I'll be free after lunch. 2 o'clock then. Give me your number and I'll text you the address. They exchanged numbers, and then the conversation loosened. And for the rest of the night, Tony found himself doing something he hadn't done in a very long time, gravitating back toward the same person over and over again. He'd talk with Carlos for a while, or grab another beer, or get pulled into some argument Marco was having about whether a particular shot on the 15th was actually out of bounds or not. But every few minutes his eyes would find Sienna across the room. She'd be talking with Kristen, or laughing with Jenna, or listening to someone else's story with that particular tilt of her head that meant she was actually paying attention. And then she'd catch him looking, and she'd smile, and those butterflies would start up again in his gut. A feeling so unfamiliar after 8 years of nothing that Tony almost didn't recognize what it was. He left the party around 11, earlier than most. Drove home with the windows down, the desert night air warm and dry against his arm. Champ and JR met him at the door in their usual frenzy of tales and spinning. Tony sat on the couch in the dark living room, one hand on Champ's broad head, and allowed himself to feel it. That nervous electricity. That pull towards someone. That dangerous, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something on the other side of all the walls he'd built. Then he locked the front door, brushed his teeth, and went to bed. Tomorrow, the dog park, 2 o'clock. He was already nervous. Tony got to the park 20 minutes early because that's what nervous people do. They show up before they need to, as if arriving first gives them some kind of tactical advantage. The dog park was a 10-minute walk from the house he shared with Marco, a big open space with a perimeter fence, a few scattered trees offering patches of shade, and the kind of scrubby grass that survived in Arizona through pure spite. A handful of other owners were already there, sitting on benches or standing in small groups while their dogs did what dogs do, ran, sniffed, chased, existed with an enviable lack of anxiety about whether they were making a good impression. Tony always kept the muzzle on Champ at dog parks. Not because Champ was aggressive, he wasn't, but because 70 pounds of enthusiastic Doberman barreling toward your Pomeranian tends to make people clutch their leashes and their hearts simultaneously. The muzzle was a courtesy, a signal that said, I know my dog looks like he could eat yours, but he really just wants to play. He unclipped the leash. Champ launched himself across the grass like a black and tan missile, and within seconds he was leading a pack of 3 other dogs in wide, looping circles around the park. The other dogs couldn't keep up, and that was clearly fine with Champ. He glanced back over his shoulder every few seconds, tongue out, checking to make sure the chase was still on. King of the park. Good, Tony thought. Burn some of that energy off before Princess gets here. He was already worried that Sienna might see Champ roughhousing and decide he was too much for her sweet golden retriever, which was a ridiculous thing to worry about, and the fact that he was worrying about it meant he cared about this going well, which was another thing he didn't want to examine too closely. He stood near the entrance, arms crossed, watching the dogs and pretending he wasn't scanning the path every 15 seconds for a blonde woman with a golden retriever. Then a streak of gold shot past his right side. A dog, moving fast, ears pinned back in that joyful full-sprint mode, and went tearing across the grass to join the pack. Princess had arrived before her owner, apparently. Tony turned around, and there she was. Sienna walked toward him with an easy stride, sunglasses pushed up on her head, wearing shorts and a simple top that suggested she dressed for comfort and not for impression, which somehow made the impression stronger. The butterflies kicked in again, right on schedule, that unsettled feeling in his stomach that he still wasn't used to. "Is that your dog?" "The one leading all the others around." Sienna stopped beside him, shading her eyes with one hand to watch the dogs. "Yeah, he likes being chased. Very few can keep up with him usually." "Well, I'm sure Princess will do her best. She loves to chase things." They stood together watching the dogs for a moment, 4 animals now running in a ragged formation with Champ at the front, Princess gaining on him from the right. "How did you like the party last night?" Tony asked. "Meet any interesting people?" "Yeah, I did, one in particular." Sienna paused, her expression serious for exactly 1 second. "I think his name was Gary or something." Tony turned to look at her. She kept her face straight for another beat before the smile broke through. "Oh, well, I'm betting Gary didn't get a doggy date, though," Tony replied, finding himself smiling back. "The guy I met did, although maybe I got his name wrong. What was your name again?" "Very funny. Seriously, though, did you have a good time?" "Yeah, I did. Everyone was really nice." Her voice shifted slightly, thoughtful now. Also, everyone seemed to know each other extremely well. It felt like a very close-knit kind of party just for close friends and family. "Yeah, it was. You were probably the only outsider for the night." "I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted," she laughed, a real one not performed. "Definitely flattered. We've got a good circle of friends that we all stick pretty close to. Usually you have to be dating or married to one of us to get an invitation in. I'm guessing Kristen made an exception because she's hoping we'll get together." "And what do you hope for, Tony?" The question landed softly, but it landed. Tony kept his eyes on the dogs. "I'm not sure yet. Apparently, I still have some hoops to jump through." "That's right, you do, but I might make them easier for you if Princess and Champ get along well." "No pressure, Champ. You can do it," Tony called out across the park, loud enough that a nearby dog owner glanced over. Sienna laughed again, and the sound of it settled something in Tony's chest that had been unsettled for a long time. They walked slowly around the perimeter of the park while the dogs ran, and the conversation found its natural rhythm. Unhurried, curious. The kind of talking that happens when two people are testing whether they actually like each other or just like the idea of each other. "Jenna told me that both you and Carlos moved out here from California," Sienna said. "What made you guys want to come to Arizona?" "Carlos got offered a better position within the construction company we work for, but he'd have to relocate. Better pay, better conditions. He tried to talk me into coming with him, but I was married at the time. My ex-wife didn't want to move, so we stayed." "So if Carlos came first, when did you move?" "About 2 years after him." "And your wife?" "Nah, we just finalized our divorce by then, so it was a good chance for me to get out of San Bernardino, get away from everyone and start over." "What about your parents? Still there?" "My father died when we were young. My mom's remarried and living in Sacramento now with her husband." Sienna nodded. "So there wasn't much keeping you." "Still, it must have been hard saying goodbye to all your old friends." Tony's jaw tightened, just slightly, a micro-movement that most people would miss. Sienna didn't miss it. "No," he said. "That part was easy, trust me." He'd said it with a finality that closed a door, and Sienna, smart, perceptive Sienna, didn't try to open it. She let the silence breathe for a few steps, then pointed across the park. "Look, all the other dogs have gone back to their owners. It's just Champ and Princess now." She was right. The pack had thinned down to 2. Champ and Princess weren't running anymore, they were playing, really playing. The retriever would bow down on her front legs, tail high and wagging furiously, then spin and bolt, and Champ would chase her for 10 yards before she'd wheel around and chase him back. There was a language to it, a back-and-forth negotiation of speed and space that looked a lot like flirting. "I think Princess has taken a liking to Champ already," Sienna said, smiling at the dogs. "See how she's getting down like that before turning to run? She's flirting with him, I swear." "Has Princess been fixed?" "No, she's a purebred. I was hoping to breed her with a litter someday." "Well, unless you want some Doberman Golden Retriever mix puppies, we should probably keep an eye on them." "Champ hasn't been fixed either then?" "Nah, I couldn't chop his balls off." "It doesn't seem right. Besides, he's a purebred too. His puppies would be worth a small fortune." "All right, definitely keep an eye on them. When she comes on heat, Champ will probably try to move heaven and earth to get to her. She's very pretty." Sienna laughed. "Yeah, if only it was that simple for people too. Hey, you look good. Are you on heat? Let's do it." Tony laughed at his own joke and the fact that he'd made it. That he was comfortable enough to be stupid and funny with this woman he barely knew surprised him. Don't joke. I'm sure a lot of people are basically like that these days with all the dating apps. Hooking up with strangers for sex without even meeting first, just showing up at some apartment to get it on. They might as well be on heat. Yeah, the world's gone a bit crazy. That's part of why I've stayed away from all of it. I'm sure some women would have swiped on your profile if you had one. You're decently handsome after all. Thanks, but they're definitely not the type of women I'd want. Women on those hookup apps are a definite no for me. He paused. You're not on any of those, by the way, are you? No, never. Anyone shallow enough to have meaningless sex with a stranger isn't someone I'd want. Not at all. Tony nodded. Something in his chest loosened a little more, the same values, the same instinct about what mattered and what didn't. Across the park, Champ had started sniffing Princess with an enthusiasm that suggested the conversation about breeding was becoming urgently relevant. Yeah, we better call them back before there's some unauthorized doggy style happening over there, Tony said, and they both called out for their dogs, laughing as Champ and Princess trotted back reluctantly, tails still going, clearly disappointed that the party was being broken up. They threw balls. They did more laps. Princess and Champ kept finding each other, and Tony and Sienna kept finding more things to talk about. Easy things, comfortable things, the kind of conversation that makes you forget you're supposed to be guarded. When the afternoon shadows started to stretch, they called the dogs in for the last time. I've really enjoyed this, Sienna said, clipping Princess's leash back on. She looked up at Tony with that smile, the real one, the one that made her whole face change. See, it wasn't so hard after all, was it? No, it was good, really good, actually. Tony hesitated for half a second then. So what's the next hoop? Oh, I'm not sure. Most guys never get past the first one. Maybe you can ask me out to dinner sometime. Sure, what about next Friday night? Sienna tilted her head, studying him. Yeah, I can do that. Are you going to pick me up too? Of course, just text me your address later. Is 7 o'clock fine? Yeah, I'll see you then, Tony. Bye, Sienna. She'd started to walk away when she turned back. Oh, by the way, what kind of place are you taking me to, just so I know how to dress? I haven't figured that out yet. I'll text you later. Okay, until then. She smiled one last time, then turned and walked off with Princess pulling gently at the leash, the golden retriever looking back over her shoulder toward Champ one last time. Tony watched them go. The late Arizona sun was warm on his face, and Champ pressed his flank against Tony's leg, panting, satisfied. He felt good, better than he'd expected. Better than he'd felt in a long time. Could he actually be moving on? The thought flickered through him like a match struck in a dark room, brief, bright, and a little frightening. Because moving on meant opening a door he'd nailed shut 8 years ago, and he still wasn't sure what was on the other side. But for the first time in a very long time, he wanted to find out. Tony picked up Sienna at 7 sharp on Friday night and took her to a place called Marin's, an Italian restaurant in Scottsdale that Jack had recommended. White tablecloths, dim lighting, the kind of menu where nothing had a price that would make a carpenter feel comfortable. But Tony wasn't trying to impress her with money. He was trying to show her he gave a damn, which, given his recent track record, felt like progress. And for the first 2 hours, everything was good. Better than good. They ordered wine, then food, and the conversation flowed the way it had at the dog park. Natural, unhurried, full of the small discoveries that happen when two people are genuinely curious about each other. Sienna talked about growing up with her older sister and her brother, about how her father had dragged them all to the golf course every weekend, whether they liked it or not, about working at the florist, and the strange window it gave her into other people's relationships. You learn a lot about people from the flowers they buy, she told him. The guys who come in looking panicked on a Friday afternoon, they screwed up. They're buying gilt bouquets. The guys who come in calm, midweek, no occasion, those are the ones buying for someone they genuinely care about. Which category would I fall into? Tony asked. Neither. You'd be the guy who walks past the shop every day and never comes in. She said it without malice, with a half-smile that told him she was teasing but not entirely joking. Yeah, fair point. The food came. They ate. Tony asked about her family. Her father still lived locally. Her brother had moved to Tucson for work. Her mother had passed away when Sienna was 19. She talked about it openly, not dramatically, with the particular steadiness of someone who'd made peace with a loss that would never fully heal. Tony listened and nodded and asked the right questions, and he could feel the rapport between them building, thickening, becoming something real. This woman was funny and smart and direct, and she didn't play games, and every minute he spent with her made him want another minute after that. Then Sienna set down her wine glass and looked at him across the candlelight. "Do you mind if I ask you something about your previous marriage?" The question entered Tony's chest like a cold draft through a cracked window. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down. "Depends, what do you want to know?" "Well, when did you meet her? How long were you two together? That kind of thing." Sienna watched his face as she asked, and Tony could see that she'd noticed the shift, the stiffening of his shoulders, the way his eyes went flat for just a moment before he caught himself. "We met in high school. We were both about 15. We started dating pretty soon after, eventually got married when we were both 20. How long were you married?" 5 years. I was divorced by the time I was 26. That's when I moved out here to be with Carlos. What was her name? Rosa. The name sat between them on the white tablecloth like something that had been spilled and couldn't be cleaned up. Sienna waited a beat before asking the next question, the question that every previous conversation in Tony's life had eventually led to, the question he'd spent 8 years avoiding. "And what happened? Why did you two get divorced after being childhood sweethearts?" Tony's hands were under the table now, his fingers pressing into his thighs. A familiar tightness was building in his chest, that constriction that came whenever this subject surfaced, that combination of anger and grief and humiliation that 8 years of silence had done nothing to diminish. "Sienna, can we not talk about my ex-wife?" His voice was even controlled, but the warmth had left it. "I'd rather not discuss that stuff, not here, not with you." The "not with you" landed harder than he'd intended, and he saw it register on Sienna's face, a small flinch quickly hidden. "Of course, I'm sorry." She picked up her wine glass, took a sip, and the subject was dropped. But the damage was already done. Not to Sienna, she recovered within seconds, smoothly steering the conversation to the movie they were going to see after dinner. The damage was to the current between them, that invisible line of warmth and connection that had been building all evening. Tony had severed it with 4 sentences, and now the air between them felt different. Thinner, cooler. They went to the movie. They sat in the darkened theater for 2 hours, sharing an armrest and a bucket of popcorn, and Tony was physically present for every minute of it. His body was in the seat. His eyes were on the screen, but everything else, whatever had been opening inside him all week, whatever fragile new thing had been reaching toward the light, had retracted behind a wall so thick he could almost feel the weight of it. Sienna could feel it too. She didn't reach for his hand, didn't lean into him. She sat in the seat beside the man she'd been excited about all week and sensed, with the accuracy of someone whose intuition had been sharpened by past hurt, that something essential had changed in the last hour. After the movie, Tony drove her home. The conversation in the car was polite, surface level, the kind of talk that fills silence without saying anything. He pulled up outside her house and walked her to the front door because that's what a decent person does, and Tony was, fundamentally, a decent person. That was part of what made the whole thing so confusing. "Would you like to come in for a coffee?" Sienna offered. She was standing in the glow of the porch light, her face turned up toward his, and he could see the hope in her expression, fragile, specific, asking for something more than coffee. "I better not. I need to get up early in the morning. Busy day ahead." "Oh, okay." The hope dimmed. "Did you have a good time tonight, though?" "Yeah, I did, and you?" "Yes, very much so." They stood there, 2 people separated by 3 feet of porch and 8 years of scar tissue. Sienna looked into Tony's eyes, waiting, hoping he'd lean in, hoping for the kiss that would tell her this was going somewhere, that the distance she'd felt all evening was temporary, that he was still in this. "Well, I guess this is good night then," she said. "Yeah, I better get going." "Have a good night and a good weekend, too." Tony turned and walked back to his car. Sienna stood on the porch and watched him go. Her keys were in her hand. The front door was right there. She could just go inside, pour herself a glass of wine, sit on the couch with Princess, and accept that this was another one that wasn't going to work out. She'd done it before. She knew the drill. But something made her call out before she could stop herself. "Tony, are you at least going to ask me out again?" He'd reached his car. His hand was on the door handle. He turned back toward her but didn't walk closer. "I'll text or call you later, okay?" "Okay, sure." He got in the car. The engine started. The headlights swept across the front of the house as he pulled away, and then the street was quiet again, and Sienna was alone on the porch with a dead feeling in her stomach. She went inside. Princess met her at the door, tail wagging, oblivious to the complexities of human attachment. Sienna dropped her keys on the counter and sank onto the couch, the retriever's head immediately appearing on her lap. "Well, Princess, I don't know what just happened." Because that was the thing, she genuinely didn't understand. For the first 90 minutes of the evening, everything had been perfect. The conversation, the chemistry, the way Tony looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was something precious and terrifying all at once. She'd felt so sure. And then she'd asked about his ex-wife, and it was like someone had reached behind Tony's eyes and turned off the lights. Not anger, not even defensiveness, exactly. Just absence. Like the man who'd been sitting across from her had packed up and left, and what remained was a polite, handsome shell going through the motions of an evening that had already ended. Not here. Not with you. What did that even mean? Not with her specifically. Not with anyone. Was it the subject, or was it her? Sienna rubbed Princess behind the ears and stared at the dark TV screen. She replayed the evening in her head, looking for the moment things went wrong, as if identifying the precise fracture would somehow help her fix it. But there was nothing to fix. There was a man who seemed to want her and a man who couldn't let himself have her, and they happened to be the same person. The weekend came and went. Tony didn't text, didn't call. Monday, Tuesday, nothing. By Wednesday afternoon, the silence had gone from disappointing to insulting to just plain confusing, and Sienna picked up her phone and called him herself because if this was over, she at least deserved to hear it. He answered on the third ring. "Hi, Sienna. Sorry I haven't gotten back to you. I've just been so busy with work and stuff." Work and stuff. She wanted to say something sharp. Instead, she kept her voice light. "That's fine. I was just calling to see if you'd like to go out with me again on Friday night and maybe the dog park on Saturday too." A pause. "Yeah, we can do that. I know Champ would like to see Princess again. I think he's been pining over her all week." "Oh, really? Good to see that at least one of you is interested." Tony let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "Hey, I'm interested too. Would you like to go to the movies this Friday? Maybe we could grab something to eat first." "That would be lovely. What time? 7 again? Yeah, are you going to pick me up too?" "Of course, I'll see you then." "Bye, Tony." Sienna ended the call and set the phone down on her desk at the florist. Through the shop window, she could see the street people walking, life continuing in its indifferent way. She was happy he'd said yes. And she was annoyed that she'd had to be the one to ask. Again. Always her making the move. Always her bridging the gap. And always that small, nagging voice in the back of her mind. Maybe he's just too polite to say he's not interested. Maybe this is just what rejection looks like when the person doing it is too kind to actually say the words. She pushed the thought down and went back to arranging flowers for a wedding order. White roses, baby's breath, all that hopeful, fragile beauty that people spent thousands of dollars on to celebrate a thing that might or might not survive the year. Friday came. Tony picked her up. They went to a casual diner this time, burgers, shakes, a booth in the corner, and the conversation flowed easily because it always did with them. That was the cruel part. When Tony was present, when he was in the room with her and not trapped somewhere inside his own head, he was everything she wanted. Funny, attentive, thoughtful. The kind of man who asked real questions and remembered the answers. He asked about her family again, her brother in Tucson, her father's latest golf tournament, whether her sister's boyfriend had finally gotten around to fixing the leaky faucet he'd been promising to fix for 3 months. He remembered details. He listened. And so, after an hour of this warmth, Sienna decided to try again. Carefully this time, gently. "Do you mind if I ask you something about your previous marriage?" She watched it happen in real time, the shift. That barely perceptible change in his posture, shoulders drawing in, jaw setting, eyes losing something, like watching a house's lights go out room by room. "Depends." His voice was careful. "What do you want to know?" "Just well, you told me you were childhood sweethearts. You must have been so close. What went wrong between you two?" Tony picked up his glass and took a drink, set it down. His fingers stayed wrapped around it. "Sienna, can we not talk about my ex-wife? I'd really rather not go there." Same words, same wall, same vanishing act. Of course, I'm sorry. The rest of the evening played out like a rerun. The movie, the drive home, the walk to the front door. Sienna didn't offer coffee this time. She didn't wait for a kiss that wasn't coming. She didn't ask if he'd call. Good night, Tony. Good night. I'll call you about the dog park tomorrow. Sure. She smiled, went inside, and closed the door. He didn't call about the dog park. Saturday passed. Sunday passed. Silence. This time, Sienna didn't pick up her phone. In her mind, the verdict was in. 2 dates, same pattern. The moment she got anywhere near whatever had happened with his ex-wife, Tony shut down completely. And the shutdown wasn't temporary, it lasted for days. He'd go cold, go quiet, disappear into whatever fortress he'd built for himself, and no amount of patience or warmth or good conversation could reach him there. She liked him. That was the frustrating part. She genuinely, deeply liked this man, but she couldn't keep banging on a door that someone on the other side kept bolting shut. So she stopped knocking. Saturday came and went. Tony didn't call. Sienna took Princess to the dog park alone, watched her run with the other dogs, and tried not to look for a Doberman that wasn't there. Monday morning on the construction site smelled like fresh-cut lumber and diesel fumes, the sun already hammering down at 8 a.m. like it had something to prove. Tony was measuring out a header beam on the second floor of the framing when Jack's boots appeared on the plywood beside him. Tony didn't look up. He knew those boots. He also knew, from the way Jack was standing there without saying anything for a good 10 seconds, that this wasn't about work. Tony, how did your date night go on Friday with Sienna? Yeah, fine, I guess. Tony kept his tape measure extended, pencil behind his ear, eyes on the lumber. You don't sound too positive about it. It went okay, all right? Why did she say something? Jack crouched down so they were at eye level. His voice dropped below the noise of the nail guns firing 2 rooms over. Yeah, she was over yesterday with Kristen. She said it didn't go well at all from her perspective. She thinks the 2 of you are dead in the water, that you're not interested in her. Jack paused. Is that about right? No, I am interested in her. Then why didn't you ask her out again? And why didn't you call her about the dog park on Saturday like you told her you would? Tony finally looked up. Jack's face had that expression he wore when he was done being polite about something. Dossett, eyes steady, the same look he gave subcontractors who were trying to cut corners on a job. Why are you hassling me about this stuff? I swear you and Kristen want us together more than we do. Really? You ghost her after a few dates and that's your response? What do you guys want from me? Kristen has a single friend and now we're all supposed to just instantly get together. What if Sienna's right and I'm not that interested? Well then just say so if that's the case. Don't ghost her while telling me you still like her when you clearly don't. She's going to be around our group whether you 2 are dating or not. At least you could do the right thing by her. Yeah, whatever. You're not going to say or do anything, are you? Jack stood back up, shaking his head. He knew Tony. He knew this was the part where the shutters came down and the conversation hit a wall. Probably not. What does it matter anyway? Jack stared at him for a long moment. The nail guns kept firing. Somewhere downstairs, Marco was yelling at a junior electrician about a junction box. What does it matter? Tony, Sienna's a good person, probably better than what you deserve with that attitude. You finally got a chance to be happy with someone nice and you act like you're being put out by the whole thing. Just drop it, okay? I told you before I don't need a woman to be happy. Stop trying to marry me off. Tony stood up and walked toward the far end of the framing, his tape measure still in his hand, the conversation over. Jack watched him go. His best friend had seemed genuinely happy around Sienna, lighter, looser, more like the version of Tony that occasionally surfaced on really good days. Then something had flipped and the old Tony was back. The one who kept everyone at arm's length and called it contentment. Sienna had told Kristen exactly when the shift happened. Both times, she'd asked about his ex-wife. Both times, Tony had shut down completely, like someone had pulled his plug. 8 years in Phoenix, and Jack realized he didn't actually know a single meaningful detail about what had happened in Tony's marriage. Neither did Marco. Tony had sealed that part of his life behind a door that none of them had ever been invited through. Jack pulled out his phone during lunch and texted Carlos. You and Jenna free this Saturday for dinner at ours. Need to talk about your brother. The reply came back 20 minutes later. Yeah, we can do that. What's going on? I'll explain Saturday. Bring wine. The week crawled by. Tony went to work, came home, took Champ to the park, A different park, not the one where he'd been with Sienna. He ate dinner with Marco most nights, watched whatever game was on, said he was fine whenever Marco asked if everything was all right. But he wasn't fine. He thought about Sienna constantly. Her voice, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him across the table at the diner before everything went sideways. The way she'd said at least one of you is interested on the phone, that little edge of hurt underneath the humor that she probably thought he hadn't caught. He'd caught it. He caught everything. That was part of the problem. He noticed too much, felt too much, and the only strategy he'd ever developed for dealing with it was to feel nothing at all. Shut the door, lock it, walk away. It had worked for 8 years. It had kept him safe. But safe and happy, he was starting to realize, were not the same thing, not even close. Saturday evening, Jack and Kristen's place. The table was set for 4, candles lit because Kristen believed dinner without candles was just eating, and a bottle of red wine was already breathing on the counter when Carlos and Jenna arrived. They ate. They drank. They talked about the kids, about the new house, about Marco's latest dating disaster involving a woman who turned out to already have a boyfriend and a husband. The usual stuff. Then over dessert, Jack set his fork down and looked across the table at Carlos. "So, your brother, what's going on with him?" Carlos leaned back in his chair. He'd been expecting this since the text. "What do you mean, what's going on with him?" He had 2 good dates with Sienna. Both times she asked about his ex-wife. Both times he completely shut down. Went cold, went distant, ghosted her for days. She thinks he's not interested. He told me he is interested. Something doesn't add up, and after 8 years of watching the guy live like a monk, I think it's time somebody explained it to me. Carlos looked at Jenna. She gave him a small nod. "It's something Tony should really be the one to tell you," Carlos said. "But he's not going to, is he?" Jenna replied, her voice gentle but firm. "He hasn't told anyone in 8 years. If you don't tell them, they'll never understand where he's coming from, and they need to understand, especially if Sienna is going to be part of this." Carlos rubbed his hand across his jaw. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. "All right. But you both have to promise me you won't hassle Tony about any of this. I'm telling you so you understand, not so you can confront him. Okay?" Jack and Kristen both nodded. Carlos took a long sip of wine, then set the glass down. "Tony and Rosa met when they were about 14, 15, high school sweethearts, and I don't just mean they were dating, they were inseparable. Best friends and boyfriend-girlfriend all wrapped into one. She spent more time at our house than her own. By the time they graduated, it was like they were already married. Just 2 kids who couldn't imagine life without each other. They only really had 2 close friends," Carlos continued. "Tony's best friend Santiago, everyone called him Santi, and Rosa's best friend Maria. Those 2 started dating as well, so the 4 of them were always together. Double dates, weekends, everything." "How old were they when they got married?" Kristen asked. "Just 20, both of them. That's pretty young." "Yeah, a little foolish too if you ask me, but Tony was sure. The guy was absolutely sure Rosa was the love of his life." Carlos paused, turning the wine glass slowly on the table. "He was already working with me by then, long hours trying to build something. Rosa wasn't working, just some part-time studying, but they got their own place, they were making it work. Then she got pregnant about a year after the wedding. Baby boy. They named him Diego after her grandfather." "Hold on." Jack's face changed. "Tony never said he has a kid." "Because he doesn't." "Did she lose the baby?" Kristen asked. "No, Diego was born healthy, beautiful kid." Carlos's voice had dropped lower now, the way voices do when they're approaching something that hurts even to describe. What Tony didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Rosa had been sleeping with Santiago behind his back, Tony's best friend. The affair started before the wedding. Before they were even married, his best friend was already with his girl. Kristen's hand went to her mouth. Jack just stared. Tony found a second phone she'd hidden. Everything was on it, texts, calls, all going back years, just her and Santi. It was completely clear what had been going on, and the worst part wasn't just that they were doing it. They were making fun of him in their messages, laughing about how Tony was too stupid to figure it out. His own wife and his best friend mocking him while he was out busting his back at work to provide for her. The room was dead silent. Jenna reached over and put her hand on Carlos's arm. Santiago was a cook, worked evenings, which meant he had every single day free while Tony was at the job site. He was over at their place constantly. And here's the thing that really destroyed my brother. The text made it clear that Rosa knew Diego wasn't Tony's son. She knew the baby was Santiago's. She'd known the whole time. 3 years Tony spent loving that boy, changing his diapers, getting up at 2 a.m. when he cried, teaching him to walk. 3 years of being a father, and it was all a lie. How did he find out about all of this? Jack asked. His voice was flat now, the kind of flat that meant he was holding something back. Found the phone, went through it. Then he went to Santiago's place and they beat the hell out of each other. Both ended up in the hospital. Carlos shook his head. The divorce was ugly. Rosa refused to get a paternity test at first. The court ordered one. Santiago was confirmed as the father. Then, and I still can't believe this, her lawyer actually argued in court that Tony should keep paying child support because his name was on the birth certificate. Even after it was proven the kid wasn't his. Even after Santiago had already moved in with her. You're kidding me. Jack's knuckles were white around his wine glass. The judge didn't go for it, thank God. Tony got his divorce and walked away clean. But clean is a relative term when your wife's been cheating on you since before your wedding day. Your best friend is the father of the kid you thought was yours, and everyone in your hometown knows the whole story. He was gutted, depressed, humiliated, angry, the works. Carlos leaned forward, his elbows on the table. That's when he moved out here to be with me, and you remember what he was like when he started on the crew, Jack. Yeah, Jack nodded slowly. Took him months to even talk to any of us. I thought he was one of those guys you needed to keep an eye on, the kind who shows up one day with a rifle. He was doing it that rough. Eventually he came out of his shell, but the damage was done. He just decided he was never going to let anyone get that close again. And 8 years later, here we are. The silence that followed lasted a long time. Kristen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Jack stared at the table, processing, rearranging everything he thought he knew about his best friend into a new and far more painful configuration. So that's why he shuts down when Sienna asks about Rosa, Kristen finally said. It's not that he's not interested, it's that he's terrified. Yeah, probably. Carlos took another drink. 8 years is a long time to hold on to that stuff. I keep telling him not every woman is like Rosa, but telling him that and him believing it are two completely different things. Maybe he just needs to take that first step of faith, Kristen said quietly, and then every step after that gets a little easier. Getting him to take that first step, that's the hard part. If we push him, he'll resent us for forcing it. He has to be the one to do this. Carlos looked around the table at the three people who cared about his brother almost as much as he did. I just hope he figures it out before he's an old man. They all nodded. The candles flickered. Outside, the Arizona night was warm and still and full of the particular silence that descends when people have just learned something that changes how they see someone they love. The following Wednesday, Kristen sat across from Sienna at a small cafe 2 blocks from the florist, stirring a latte she hadn't yet tasted, trying to decide whether what she was about to do was the right call. Sienna looked tired. Not physically. She was still put together, still pretty, still the kind of woman who turned heads in a coffee shop without trying. But there was something dimmed behind her eyes, a flatness that hadn't been there a few weeks ago. How are you doing? Kristen asked. I'm fine, work's been busy. Princess chewed through another pair of my shoes, so that's fun. Sienna smiled, but it didn't reach all the way. And the Tony situation? Sienna's fingers tightened around her cup. There is no Tony situation. I think that's kind of the point. Do you still like him? Kristen, just answer the question. Sienna stared at her coffee for a moment. Yeah, I do. That's what makes it so frustrating. When he's actually there, when he's present and talking and being himself, he's everything I'd want. Funny, kind, real. But then I get anywhere near whatever happened with his ex-wife, and it's like someone flips a switch. He just vanishes, and I can't keep chasing someone who doesn't want to be caught. Kristen nodded slowly. What if I told you there was a reason for all of that? A specific reason that explains everything. Why he shuts down, why he's been alone for 8 years, why he can't even say his ex-wife's name without freezing up. Sienna looked at her. What do you mean? Carlos told us what happened. The full story. And I've been going back and forth all week about whether I should share it with you because it's really Tony's story to tell. But Tony is never going to tell it. Not to you, not to anyone. And I think if you understood what he went through, you might see him differently. Differently how? Not as a guy who's blowing you off, as a guy who's been so badly hurt that he can't figure out how to let someone in again. Sienna set her cup down. Tell me. So Kristen told her. Not every detail. She kept some of the rower parts brief, the fight with Santiago, the court proceedings, but enough. Rosa, the affair that started before the wedding. Santiago standing beside Tony as his best man while sleeping with his wife. The baby that Tony raised for 3 years as his own son, the paternity test, the humiliation. The way Tony had packed up his entire life and moved across the state just to escape the wreckage. By the time Kristen finished, Sienna hadn't touched her coffee. She was staring at the table, her expression unreadable at first, and then gradually shifting as the pieces fell into place, every confusing moment from the past several weeks suddenly making sense. It all makes a lot more sense now, Sienna finally said. Her voice was quieter than before. How he acted after I asked about his ex-wife, that wasn't him losing interest, that was him panicking. Yeah, he crosses into territory where he'd have to be vulnerable and he bolts. It's been his survival mechanism for almost a decade. His wife, his best friend, his son. Sienna shook her head slowly. No wonder he can't talk about it. That's not just a bad breakup. That's having your entire life revealed as a lie. Exactly. Sienna picked up her coffee, took a sip, then set it back down. Something was shifting behind her eyes, not pity exactly, something more active. Understanding reorganizing itself into a decision. So now the question, Kristen said. Do you still like him? And if you do, are you prepared to deal with all that baggage to hopefully get to the other side? Sienna let out a small laugh, not quite amused, more like the sound someone makes when they recognize the absurdity of their own situation. Is this the part where I say I can fix him? They both laughed, and the tension broke just enough. Seriously though, Kristen pressed. Sienna took a breath. He probably just needs me to be his friend right now, not to push for anything more than that, just let him decide when he's ready to move forward. And you're willing to wait for that? It could take a while, a long while. I know I need to think about it. It's a lot to take on, especially when there's a real chance that nothing will ever come from it. He might never get past what happened. I have to be honest with myself about that. I get it. And I want you to know, if you do decide to give him another chance, none of us will push you to. We won't ask when you're moving in together or any of that. We'll just let it happen on its own. That would help. Honestly, part of the problem before was that I could feel everyone watching us, everyone hoping. It made everything feel bigger than it needed to be. Kristen nodded. No more matchmaking, I promise. I'll think about it, Sienna said. Give me a few days. They changed the subject after that. Talked about Kristen's new house, about a terrible movie they'd both somehow watched the same weekend, about Princess's ongoing vendetta against Sienna's shoe collection. But underneath the easy conversation, Sienna's mind was already working. She could see it now, the whole picture. A man who'd loved completely and been betrayed completely, who'd lost not just his wife but his best friend and the child he thought was his, all in the same devastating discovery. A man who'd responded by building a wall so high and so thick that 8 years later he was still standing behind it. Alone, safe, miserable. She thought about the way Tony had looked at her at the party, like she was something he wanted but was afraid to reach for. She thought about his voice when he'd said, I haven't been out with anyone in a very long time. She thought about the butterflies she'd felt herself that first afternoon at the dog park, when the conversation had been so easy and natural that she'd forgotten, briefly, that she was supposed to be guarding her own heart too. She couldn't fix him. She knew that. But maybe she could be patient enough to let him fix himself. And maybe, if she was lucky, he'd let her be there when he did. Maybe. The following Sunday, Tony pulled into the Stone Creek parking lot expecting the usual threesome. Him, Jack, Marco, 18 holes, and some trash talk. Instead, Jack met him at the kart staging area with news. Kristen and Sienna are joining us today. We're playing as a 5. Tony froze with his golf bag half out of the truck. Since when? Since Kristen decided she wanted to play and Sienna's been wanting to get out on a course again. Problem. A dozen responses cycled through Tony's mind. He went with, no problem. Good, because they're already on the putting green. Tony hadn't seen Sienna in almost 3 weeks. 20 days if he was being precise about it, which apparently he was because he'd been counting without admitting that he'd been counting. She looked good, simple golf outfit, hair pulled back, sunglasses pushed up on her head. She was practicing a putt when he walked up and she sank it from about 8 feet without looking up. "Nice putt," Tony said. Sienna straightened and met his eyes. Her expression was warm but measured. No eagerness, no coldness, just a steady middle ground that Tony found more disarming than either extreme would have been. "Thanks. I'm a little rusty, though. Haven't played in a couple of months." "You played with Kristen a few weeks back, didn't you?" "That was more of a social round. I spent most of it trying not to embarrass myself." She smiled at him, a real smile, but a careful one. Marco appeared behind Tony and clapped him on the shoulder. "All right, 5-ball today. Sienna, fair warning, Tony cheats. I've never cheated at anything in my life. He moves his ball when nobody's looking. That happened once and it was an accident." Sure it was, and just like that, they were off. The front 9 passed in the usual blur of shots and banter, but Tony noticed quickly that Sienna wasn't just tagging along. She could play. Her swing was compact and controlled, nothing flashy, but clean mechanics that put her ball in play consistently. By the time they made the turn, she was sitting at 4 over, which was better than Jack and competitive with Marco. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Marco asked as they headed to the 10th tee. "My father and my brother are obsessed," Sienna replied. "I used to tag along every weekend growing up. I guess some of it stuck. Some of it, you're beating Jack." "Everyone beats Jack," Tony said, and even Jack laughed at that. As the back 9 unfolded, the group naturally stretched out along the fairways. Marco was slicing into trouble on nearly every hole. Jack and Kristen were walking together, talking more than playing. And Tony found himself alongside Sienna more and more often, their balls landing in the same general areas, their walks to the next shot becoming a private conversation within the larger group. On the 14th fairway, they were finally alone. Jack's ball was in the left rough, Marco was somewhere in the trees on the right, and Kristen was waiting by the ladies' tee on the next hole. Tony and Sienna walked together toward their balls, which sat about 20 yards apart in the center of the fairway. Tony had been rehearsing something in his head for the last 4 holes. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't planned. It was just true, and he was tired of not saying true things to this woman. "Sienna, I'm sorry for not going to the park with you 2 weekends ago, or for not asking you out again, or for being, well, a bit of a dick, I guess." Sienna kept walking, but she turned her head toward him. "Apology accepted, although I don't think Princess would be too happy about it. She keeps looking around for Champ every time I take her to the park." "Yeah, well, Champ is a very handsome boy. It's understandable that she'd miss him. Princess is very pretty too, you know. I think Champ was just as crazy about her. He was pretty smitten." Tony was quiet for a few steps then. "Much like me with you." Sienna didn't respond right away. She smiled softly, privately, and kept walking. "Really?" she finally said. "That's nice." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence between 2 people who both know something important is happening and neither wants to rush it. "I know you've been thinking that I'm not interested," Tony said, "especially with how I've been acting, but that's not true." "Not true at all. I'm very interested in you. I just don't know how to go about expressing that very well. And there's other things I've been trying to move on from, things that I haven't been doing a good enough job of figuring out." "You're talking about your ex-wife?" "Yeah, I am," he exhaled. "I know it's been a long time since the divorce. Everyone keeps telling me I should have moved on by now, and they're probably right. I'm completely over her, but it hasn't been easy to want to be with anyone else since. So I'm sorry if I've been coming across as hot and cold. I don't mean to." They reached Sienna's ball. She pulled her 7-iron from her bag but didn't address the ball yet. She turned to face Tony fully. "Everyone deals with things in their own time," she said. "Some people bounce back right away, for others it takes years. But I want you to remember one thing while you're figuring it all out. I'm not your ex-wife. What happened between you two won't happen between us because I'm not like her. I want you to remember that." "I'll try." Sienna nodded, then set up over her ball and hit a clean shot that landed on the front edge of the green. They walked together toward Tony's ball, which was sitting up nicely about 30 yards short. "Sienna, would you like to go out with me next Friday night? I'd like to take you somewhere nice. Proper restaurant, real chef, the works." She glanced at him sideways. "Are you sure? You're not just asking because you feel like you have to? We can take it slower, you know. Sounds like you're trying to back out already." "Not at all. I just don't want to start getting my hopes up if you're not ready for whatever this is. But I want you to get your hopes up. Mine already are." Something shifted in Sienna's face, a softening, a warmth that she'd been holding back finally allowed to surface. She didn't say anything for a moment, just walked beside him. Then, as Tony was pulling his pitching wedge, she spoke again. "Tony, I know all about Rosa, about the boy you were raising, and about your best friend, too. I just wanted to say that up front so you don't feel like you need to explain any of it to me. I want us to be open and honest with each other." Tony looked up from his stance. His face was impossible to read for a second. Surprise, vulnerability, relief, all of it passing through like clouds across a fast sky. "Are you trying to throw off my chip shot or something?" Sienna laughed. "No." "Well, maybe a little." He hit the chip. It landed soft, rolled to about 9 feet from the pin. They walked onto the green together. "This is for par," Sienna said, reading her own putt from the front edge, about 15 feet slightly downhill with a left-to-right break. Tony studied the line from behind her. "Aim about a cup's width to the left. This green runs hard from left to right, especially on this tier." Sienna adjusted her aim, took her stroke, and watched the ball track across the green, dead straight at first, then catching the slope and curving gently right, rolling toward the hole with decreasing speed until it caught the lip and dropped. "Yes." Tony pumped his fist, genuinely thrilled, and came over for a high five that Sienna met with a grin that could have lit up the entire golf course. "Thanks for the read. I would have missed that without you." "You're welcome. You're quite good, you know. Maybe we could come out here and play on our own sometimes. It's a good place to clear your head. Great scenery, too." "I'd love that. But we still need our dog park dates, too. They won't let Champ and Princess run around out here with us." "Yeah, of course." Tony sank his own putt for par, and they walked to the next tee together, their arms close enough that their hands almost brushed with each step. When they rejoined the group at the 16th, Kristen noticed immediately. The body language between Tony and Sienna had transformed, not dramatically, not in any way that would invite teasing, but unmistakably. They stood closer. They talked easier. They looked at each other the way people do when something has been decided, even if neither of them has said the words yet. Kristen caught Sienna's eye across the tee box and gave her a small smile, a nod. Sienna smiled back. After the round, they all sat together in the club restaurant for lunch, and Tony and Sienna ended up side by side, their chairs angled slightly toward each other, talking quietly while the rest of the table carried on around them. To anyone watching, they looked like two people at the very beginning of something real, still cautious, still careful, but no longer afraid. And for the first time in 8 years, Tony wasn't pretending everything was fine. Everything actually was. Friday arrived like a held breath finally released. Tony picked Sienna up at 7 in a button-down shirt she'd never seen him wear, dark jeans, the truck cleaned inside and out for the first time in probably months. He'd made a reservation at Cereza, a place in Old Town Scottsdale that Carlos's wife had recommended. Low lighting, exposed brick. The kind of restaurant where the menu didn't have prices and the wine list was thicker than most novels. "You look really nice," Sienna told him as she climbed into the truck. Simple black dress, hair down, those blue eyes catching the dashboard light. "You look incredible," he responded, and the honesty of it, no deflection, no shrug, made Sienna's stomach flip in a way she hadn't expected. Dinner was everything it should have been. They talked about her week, a nightmare wedding order involving 400 hand-tied boutonnieres. He told her about a framing issue on the current build that had cost them a full day. They talked about Champ chasing a squirrel through Marco's freshly planted herb garden. They talked about Princess discovering she could open the pantry door and helping herself to an entire bag of treats. 2 hours passed. Neither of them checked a phone. Neither wanted to be anywhere else. By the time they finished dessert, it was just past 9. Early. The night still young, the air outside warm and dry, the Scottsdale streets busy with people moving between bars and restaurants. Tony opened the truck door for her. Then, instead of starting the engine, "Sienna, would you like to come back to my place? Maybe watch something, have some wine. It won't be as fancy as what we just had, but I'd love to. Is Marco going to be there?" "Saturday night? He's probably already 3 clubs deep by now. Won't see him until morning." They drove to Tony's place. The house was quiet. JR trotted over for a quick investigation of the newcomer, sniffed Sienna's ankles, accepted a scratch behind the ears, then disappeared back to whatever corner he'd been sleeping in. Champ predictably went straight for Sienna like she was a long-lost relative, his whole body wiggling with enthusiasm until she knelt down and gave him a proper greeting. "He remembers you," Tony said. "Of course he does, we're old friends." Sienna stood up, brushed the dog hair off her dress, and looked around. "Nice place, it's bigger than I expected. 3 bedrooms, big yard out back." That was the selling point, the yard for the dogs. Tony poured 2 glasses of red wine. They settled onto the couch. He found something on TV, a show neither of them had seen, something that required 0 commitment and 0 brain power. Within 10 minutes, Sienna had leaned into him. His arm was around her shoulders. Her head rested against his chest, and he could smell her shampoo, something faintly floral like the shop where she worked. The TV played on, but the show could have been in another language for all either of them were tracking it. "Are you watching this?" Sienna asked, her voice slightly muffled against his shirt. "No, not really. What are you thinking about?" "Honestly." "I'm thinking about how badly I want to kiss you." Sienna lifted her head to look at him. Her eyes were soft and certain in the dim light of the living room, and whatever distance had existed between them over the past month, the false starts, the ghosting, the walls, all of it compressed down to nothing in the space of a single breath. "Then kiss me already," she said. He did. And whatever part of Tony had been holding back, whatever locked door he'd been pressing his weight against for 8 years, it gave way. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative. The second was not. Something ignited between them, fast and hungry and mutual, and the TV became background noise, then irrelevant, then forgotten entirely as they found their way down the hall to Tony's bedroom, leaving a trail of shoes and inhibitions behind them. What followed was urgent, passionate, and overdue. 8 years of nothing for Tony, over a year for Sienna. The math alone would explain the intensity, but it was more than that. It was the release of weeks of wanting and waiting and wondering, the physical expression of a connection that had been building since a Sunday afternoon at a golf club when a blonde woman sat down beside a man who'd forgotten how to want anything. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the ceiling fan turning slowly above them, both slightly breathless, both slightly stunned by what had just happened. "I didn't plan for this tonight," Tony said, staring at the ceiling. "When I invited you over, I swear this wasn't what I had in mind. Tony, I know. I just don't want you to think this was all I was after. I wanted this too." "You don't need to explain." She propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him. "This is the first time you've been with anyone since your divorce, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is." He met her eyes. "I'm hoping this is the start of something real, not just a one-time thing." "I'm hoping for that too. We can take it slow though if you need to. There's no rush." "Speak for yourself." "I can't wait to do this again." Sienna laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh, and dropped her head onto his chest, and Tony felt something crack open inside him that he'd thought was permanently sealed. But Sienna wasn't finished. After a few minutes of quiet, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest, she spoke again. "Tony, before we go any deeper into this, I need you to do something for me." "Okay, what is it?" "I need you to be honest with me about how you still feel, about everything, about Rosa, about what happened, about why you've been locked up for 8 years. I don't want us to start this with stuff buried between us. I need a clean slate, and I need you to give me one." Tony went very still. The ceiling fan turned. Somewhere in the house, Champ's nails clicked on the tile floor as he shifted in his sleep. "All right," he said. "I can do that, but I want you to know I haven't talked about this with anyone, not even Carlos, not really. I've tried not to even think about it." "I know, and I know as a guy you probably want to keep all that stuff bottled up so you don't look vulnerable. I'm guessing that's what you've been doing for 8 years. "Yeah, pretty much. I don't want you carrying that around anymore, not if we're going to be together, it won't help us." She lifted her head to look at him. "Whatever you tell me, I'll take it to the grave. This is just between us, no judgment. This is your chance to get it all out without the fear of it being used against you." Tony lay there for a long time. The darkness of the room felt safe, safer than daylight, safer than a restaurant table or a golf course fairway. Here, with the warmth of her body against his and the quiet of the house around them, it felt like the kind of place where a person might finally be able to say things they'd been choking on for nearly a decade. "All right," he said again. "I guess I'd start with how it felt when I found out she'd been cheating on me, because it wasn't just the cheating, it was who she was to me. Rosa was my everything, my best friend before she was my girlfriend, The person I told everything to. She was the reason I went to work every morning, the reason I was trying to build something. She knew parts of me that nobody else knew. And then to find out that she never truly felt the same way about me, he trailed off. The words were coming slowly, dragged up from somewhere deep and rust-sealed. Was she in love with Santiago? Sienna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I think so. The texts between them sounded like it, but maybe that was just to make him feel special. I don't know. Did you have any idea? Before you found the phone? None, zero, and that's hard for me to accept even now that the signs must have been there and I just ignored them. Looking back, yeah, there were moments, but at the time, I was completely blind. Sienna nodded against his chest, saying nothing, giving him room. The worst part was reading their texts, how often they got together while I was at work. But also how they joked about me being too stupid to notice. My wife and my best friend were laughing at me. While I was out there loving her and spending my free time with him, they were mocking me for it. I still can't understand how two people could do that and enjoy it. When did it start? Before we were married. Her second phone, she only got it to keep their things secret. The very first text on it was the start of the affair. She was still only 19. We didn't get married until we were 20. His voice went flat. I still can't figure out why she married me. If she wanted to be with Santi, why not just leave? Why go through with it? Why stand there at the altar and say vows she was already breaking? Some people get a thrill from secrets, Sienna said quietly. The plotting, the sneaking around, take that away, make it a normal relationship, and maybe it loses whatever made it exciting for them. Maybe, but it would have been so much easier if she just left. It would have hurt, but not like this. Another long silence. Tony's hand found Sienna's in the dark. She still married me. And Santi stood right there beside me as my best man. Then she got pregnant within the year. Tony's voice cracked slightly, just enough to hear. Her texts made it clear that she knew Diego was his, not mine. She knew it and she let me believe he was my son. For 3 years, I loved that boy with everything I had. He wasn't their son back then, he was our son, my son. Sienna's fingers tightened around his. Finding out that my own son wasn't actually mine, that was the hardest thing in all of this. Tony's voice was raw now, stripped of the control he usually maintained. That almost killed me, and I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I know, Sienna whispered. They lay together in silence for a while. Tony breathed. Sienna waited. Her lawyer tried to get me to keep paying child support even after the paternity test proved he was Santiago's. Can you imagine that? 3 years of raising someone else's kid, and they still wanted my money. What did the judge say? Threw it out. I walked away with nothing except the knowledge that the last 10 years of my life had been a complete lie. How do you feel about it now? All of it, Tony thought for a long time. Bitterly disappointed, disgusted. I loved her so much. I thought we were going to grow old together. And then to have all of that ripped away, my wife, my best friend, my son, my whole life. It broke me. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. Are you still broken? Another pause. I hope not. You're the first woman I've had real feelings for since all of that, so maybe I'm finally getting past it, but I know I've been doing a bad job of it so far. Sienna propped herself up again, looking down at him in the darkness. Yeah, but I'm going to let that slide this one time. Her voice was gentle but firm. From now on, I need you to be the man I know you are. No more hiding. No more disappearing when things get hard. I want you to be as open with me as I am with you. That's the deal. Can you do that? Yeah, I can promise you that, although I'm not the kind of guy who's going to be constantly talking about his feelings or anything. No, and that's not the man I'm falling for either. The word falling settled between them like something precious and fragile. Tony reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Thank you for listening to all of that and for not running. I'm not going anywhere, Tony. She kissed him slowly this time and then pulled back with that look in her eye, the one that was equal parts warmth and mischief. Now, with all of that out in the open, how would you feel about going again? Tony blinked. Twice in 1 hour. Seriously, are you up for it? You bet I am. Sienna laughed, and Tony pulled her close, and for the first time in 8 years, every locked door in his chest stood wide open. Not because the past had stopped hurting, not because the scars had disappeared, but because someone had finally convinced him that the risk of letting someone in was worth more than the safety of keeping everyone out. And this time, he believed it. Sunlight hit Tony's face through the gap in the curtains, that sharp Arizona morning light that doesn't ease you awake so much as announce that the day has started whether you're ready or not. He blinked, disoriented for half a second, then felt the warmth of another body beside him and remembered everything. Sienna was still asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked under the pillow, her blonde hair fanned out across the sheets. Her breathing was slow and even. She looked peaceful in a way that made Tony's chest tighten, not with anxiety this time, but with something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten the name for it. Gratitude. That was the word. He was grateful she was here. Grateful she'd stayed. Grateful she'd listened to all of it last night and hadn't flinched, hadn't judged, hadn't looked at him like he was damaged goods. Champ's nails clicked on the hallway tile outside the bedroom door, followed by the lighter, faster scramble of JR's paws. Both dogs knew that sunlight meant breakfast, and breakfast was already overdue by their internal clocks. Tony slipped out of bed carefully, pulled on shorts and a t-shirt, and opened the door to find Champ sitting there with his head tilted, JR bouncing beside him like a small, furry pogo stick. He got them both fed, started coffee, and was leaning against the kitchen counter when he heard footsteps behind him. But it wasn't Sienna. Marco stood in the kitchen doorway in boxers and a wrinkled club shirt, hair pointing in 4 different directions, squinting against the light like a vampire who'd accidentally wandered into a church. "Morning," Tony said. "What time is it?" "Almost 8. Marco grunted, shuffled toward the coffee maker, then stopped. His nose twitched. He looked at the 2 mugs Tony had set out instead of the usual one. Then he looked down the hallway toward Tony's closed bedroom door, then back at Tony. A grin spread across Marco's wrecked face like sunrise over a landfill. "No way. Don't start. Is someone here? Is there a woman in your bedroom right now?" "Marco." Holy hell, the monk has broken his vows. Marco was fully awake now, hangover forgotten, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed and a grin that could only be described as triumphant. "Who is it? Please tell me it's Sienna." "Yes, it's Sienna, and keep your voice down." "Tony, this is the greatest morning of my life. I need to call Jack." "You're not calling anyone, and you're going to act normal when she comes out." "Define normal. Like you're not a complete idiot. That's a big ask before coffee." Marco poured himself a cup, still grinning. He took a sip, burned his tongue, and didn't care. "Seriously, though, good for you, man. I mean it." "Thanks. Now please go put on pants." Marco was halfway down the hall when Sienna's door opened. She stepped out in one of Tony's t-shirts, oversized, hitting her mid-thigh, and nearly collided with Marco, who was standing there shirtless, holding a coffee mug, looking like he'd been assembled from spare parts. "Good morning, Sienna." "Good morning, Marco. Welcome to our home. Please don't judge us by the general state of things. I've seen worse." "That's the spirit." Marco disappeared into his room, and Sienna padded into the kitchen where Tony was already holding out a coffee for her. "Sorry about that," he said. "Don't be, he's funny." She took the mug, leaned against the counter beside him, close enough that their arms touched. "So, good morning." "Good morning." "How do you feel?" Tony considered the question. Really considered it the way Sienna had asked him to start doing, honestly, without deflection, without the automatic "I'm fine" that had been his default for the better part of a decade. "I feel good. Really good, actually, like something heavy got lifted off my chest." "That's because something did." She sipped her coffee. "So what do you want to do today?" "I was thinking we could take Champ and Princess to the dog park, if you're up for it." Sienna smiled over the rim of her mug. "I've been waiting weeks for you to say that." They walked to the park that afternoon, both dogs straining at their leashes with the desperate enthusiasm of animals who have been promised exactly the thing they want most. When they got through the gate and unclipped the leads, Champ and Princess took off together like they'd been counting the days, running side by side in those wide, joyful circles that dogs do when the world is exactly right. Tony reached over and took Sienna's hand. She laced her fingers through his without looking up, without making a big deal of it, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. They walked. They talked. They threw balls and watched their dogs be happier than any 2 creatures had a right to be on a Saturday afternoon in Arizona. And for the first time since Tony could remember, the park didn't feel like a place he went to fill empty hours. It felt like a place he went to be with someone. A place where the future looked like something worth walking toward instead of something to be afraid of. The weeks that followed rewrote the rhythms of Tony's life so gradually that he almost didn't notice it happening. Sienna started spending more nights at his place than at her sister's. Princess became a permanent fixture in the backyard, where she and Champ had established themselves as the ruling couple of the property, with JR serving as their hyperactive court jester. Marco took the new arrangement in stride, adapting to the presence of a woman in the house with the ease of a man who'd had plenty of women in houses before, though he made a point of noting that this was the first one who'd stuck around for breakfast more than once. Sunday mornings, Tony and Sienna would join the group at Stone Creek. She played with them now as a regular. Her short game was better than Jack's, which Jack pretended not to mind but clearly did. Afterward, they'd all pile into the club restaurant for lunch, and Sienna would sit beside Tony the way she always did, close and comfortable, and nobody made a fuss about it because Kristen had kept her word. No pushing, no questions, just quiet, happy observation. One afternoon at the building site during lunch break, Tony sat down beside Jack on a stack of lumber and said something that Jack had waited 5 years to hear. "I want to tell you about what happened with my ex-wife." Jack set his sandwich down, didn't say anything, just looked at Tony and waited. Kristen told Sienna the whole story. Sienna told me she knew. And then I told her everything, how I felt, what it did to me, all of it. First time I've ever said any of it out loud. Tony paused, picking at the label on his water bottle. But I figured if I could say it to someone I've known for a few weeks, I should be able to say it to someone I've known for 5 years. You don't have to tell me anything, Tony. Not unless you want to. I know. But I want to, that's the whole point. So Tony told him, not everything, not every detail of every text, not every moment of the court proceedings, but enough. Rosa, Santiago, Diego, the 3 years of raising a son who wasn't his, the wall he'd built afterward, and the woman who'd somehow convinced him to take it down. Jack listened without interrupting. When Tony finished, Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the half-framed house in front of them. "I'm sorry you went through that, Tony, and I'm sorry I ever gave you a hard time about the dating stuff. If I'd known..." "You couldn't have known. I didn't let anyone know. That was the whole problem." "Well, you let someone in now. That took guts." "Took Sienna is what it took." "I wouldn't have gotten there on my own." Jack nodded, picked his sandwich back up. "For what it's worth, I think she's the best thing that's ever happened to you." "Yeah." Tony looked across the building site to where Marco was arguing with a plumber about a pipe fitting. "Don't tell Marco I got emotional, though. He'll never let me hear the end of it. Your secret's safe with me." 2 months in, and Tony was starting to learn that healing wasn't a straight line. It was more like the Arizona weather, mostly clear, occasionally blindsided by something you didn't see coming. He was at the hardware store on a Saturday morning, picking up replacement brackets for a shelving unit Sienna wanted installed at his place. Her things were migrating over in stages. A drawer here, a shelf there, toiletries colonizing his bathroom counter like a slow-moving but inevitable invasion. He didn't mind. He liked finding evidence of her in his space. He was in the fastener aisle when he saw them. A young father, maybe late 20s, holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been older than 3. The kid had dark hair and dark eyes and was babbling about wanting to see the power tools, and the father was laughing, crouching down to the boy's level, saying they could go look but they couldn't touch anything. Tony's hand tightened on the bracket in his grip, the familiar compression in his chest. Diego would be about 11 or 12 now, probably not asking to look at power tools anymore. Probably asking for a phone or a video game or whatever kids that age wanted these days. Tony had no idea. He'd missed all of it. He stood in the aisle for a long moment, watching the father lift his son onto his shoulders, the boy's laughter echoing off the high warehouse ceiling. Then he put the brackets in his cart and drove home. That evening, while Sienna was making dinner and he was pretending to help by cutting vegetables at a pace that could only be described as deliberately unhurried, he told her about it. "I saw a kid at the hardware store today, dark hair, maybe 3 years old. He was with his dad." Tony kept his eyes on the cutting board. "It made me think about Diego." Sienna stopped stirring. She didn't turn around immediately, giving him a moment. Then she set the spoon down and faced him. "What did you think about?" "Just wondering what he looks like now, if he's happy, whether Santi ended up being a good father to him. Stupid stuff." "That's not stupid stuff, Tony. It feels stupid. He's not my son. He was never my son. I need to stop." He was your son for 3 years. You raised him, you loved him, you don't need to stop anything. It's okay to think about him. Tony set the knife down. His eyes were dry, but his jaw was tight. I used to imagine running into them, Rosa and Santi and Diego, on the street or at a store or something. I'd imagine what I would say, how I would act. For the first few years out here, I played that scenario in my head hundreds of times. And what did you decide you'd say? Nothing. Every version ended with me saying nothing and just walking away, because that's all I knew how to do. And now, Tony looked at her. Now I think I'd be okay. I think I'd look at them and feel sad about what happened, but not destroyed by it. Not anymore. Sienna crossed the kitchen and kissed him. Soft, brief, firm, the kind of kiss that said I'm here without needing to say it. Dinner's going to burn if you keep being emotionally available, she said. Well, we can't have that. Tony picked the knife back up. But thank you for letting me talk about this stuff without making me feel like there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. There never was. You just got hurt by someone who should have loved you better. Tony nodded, and they went back to making dinner, and the evening continued the way evenings do when two people have figured out how to be honest with each other. Imperfectly, sometimes clumsily, but with the steady intention of showing up for one another no matter what surfaces. Carlos noticed the change before anyone else, which made sense. He'd watched his brother's slow decline more closely than anyone, so he was the first to recognize the reversal. They were on a job site, just the two of them reviewing blueprints for a kitchen remodel when Carlos brought it up. You seem different. Different how? Lighter. Like you're not carrying a refrigerator on your back anymore. Carlos looked at his brother over the edge of the blueprints. Sienna? Yeah. I'm happy for you, Tony. I really am. Mom called me last week, by the way. She wants to meet her. Yeah, I know. Sienna's already talking about flying up for Thanksgiving. She wants to bring Princess on the plane, which should be an adventure. Mom's going to cry? Mom cries when her toast comes out right, but yeah, she's going to lose it. Carlos laughed, a real deep laugh, and for a second Tony saw his brother not as his boss or his supervisor or the guy who'd been worrying about him for 8 years, but as his brother, just his brother, happy that something good was finally happening. You know what Rosa took from you? Carlos said, folding the blueprints. Not just the marriage or Diego, she took your ability to believe that you deserved something good, and it looks like Sienna's giving that back. She's not giving it back, she's just making it easier for me to find it again. Carlos clapped him on the shoulder. Same thing, Tony. Thanksgiving in Sacramento was exactly what Tony's mother had been praying for, since her youngest son had moved to Arizona 8 years ago. Carmen Ramirez, remarried now as Carmen Delgado, opened her front door to find Tony standing on the porch with his arm around a beautiful blonde woman, a golden retriever sitting politely at their feet, and an expression on his face that she hadn't seen since he was a teenager. He looked happy, genuinely, unmistakably happy. And Carmen, true to Carlos's prediction, burst into tears before anyone said a single word. Mom, this is Sienna. Sienna, this is my mother. It's so wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Delgado. Sienna extended her hand, but Carmen grabbed her and pulled her into a hug so tight that Princess started barking, thinking her owner was being attacked. Oh, Mija, I've been waiting so long for this. Carmen pulled back, wiping her eyes, then looked down at Princess. And who is this beautiful girl? That's Princess. She's Sienna's. She's very friendly, I promise. Carmen crouched down and let Princess lick her face while Tony's stepfather, Ray, appeared in the doorway and shook Tony's hand with the quiet warmth of a man who'd learned years ago that the best thing he could do for his stepsons was just be steady and present. Over the next 3 days, Sienna witnessed something she'd only heard about secondhand: the Ramirez family at full strength. Carlos and Jenna flew up with the kids. Carmen cooked enough food to feed a small army. Ray kept everyone's glasses filled. The children ran screaming through the house while the adults pretended to be annoyed but were secretly thrilled by the chaos. And in the middle of all of it, Sienna watched Tony be a version of himself she'd never fully seen before. Relaxed, laughing, teasing his brother, chasing his niece and nephew around the backyard, helping his mother in the kitchen while she told him stories about his father. On the second night, Carmen pulled Sienna aside while the men were watching football. Thank you, Carmen said, and her voice carried the weight of 8 years of worry. For what? For bringing my son back. I don't just mean to this house, I mean back to himself. He was gone for a long time, Sienna, and now he's here. Sienna didn't know what to say to that, so she just held Carmen's hand and nodded. 3 weeks later, Tony met Sienna's family. Her father, Greg, and her older brother, Luke, were exactly as advertised, golf-obsessed, protective in that quiet way that men who express love through competition tend to be, and deeply curious about the man their Sienna had chosen. Greg suggested a round at his club in Chandler. Just the 3 men. Tony recognized a test when he saw one. "What's your handicap?" Greg asked on the first tee. "Usually play off about a 6, sir." "Don't call me sir, and don't let me win either. Luke does that sometimes, and it makes me feel old." "I don't let you win, Dad. You just play better when you're angry." "Nonsense." They played 18 holes in the dry December air, and Tony held nothing back. He shot a 74, which was 2 over par on a course he'd never played before. Greg shot 78. Luke shot 81 and blamed his putter for at least 4 of those strokes. Over beers afterward, Greg studied Tony with the careful assessment of a father who'd already made up his mind but wanted the formality of pretending he hadn't. "Sienna told me about your previous marriage," Greg said. "Not the details, just that it was bad and that you've been dealing with the aftermath for a long time." "Yes, sir. Greg, sorry. Yeah, it took me a while to get past it. Your daughter was the one who helped me do that. She's good at that, gets it from her mother." Greg's face softened for a moment, the mention of his late wife opening a door he usually kept closed. "I'll tell you this, Tony. I've watched Sienna date exactly one other guy seriously, and it was a disaster. She was 22, he was a liar, and she spent a year recovering from it. The fact that she's willing to take a chance on someone again tells me something about you." "What does it tell you?" "That you're worth the risk, but if you ever make me doubt that assessment, I'll be a very difficult person to deal with." "Understood. Good, now order another round. Luke's buying." "Why am I buying?" "Because you shot an 81 and that deserves a penalty." 6 months into their relationship, Sienna moved in officially. Marco helped carry boxes, made exactly 7 jokes about losing his roommate to the other team, and then surprised everyone by admitting he was happy to have the extra room because he'd started seeing someone himself. A nurse named Vanessa who he'd met not at a club, but at a dog park, of all places. JR, it turned out, was a better wingman than any dating app. Princess and Champ now shared the backyard full-time, and the sight of them lying together in the evening shade, the big dark Doberman and the golden retriever, side by side, completely at ease, became the image that Tony associated most strongly with the word home. Things weren't perfect. They never are. Tony still had moments where old instincts surfaced. A flash of suspicion when Sienna's phone buzzed late at night. A flicker of withdrawal when a conversation veered too close to a nerve he hadn't fully deadened. But the difference now was that he caught it. He felt the old reflex kick in, felt the wall start to rise, and he made the conscious choice to leave it down. Sometimes he told Sienna what was happening. Sometimes he just breathed through it until it passed. Either way, he stayed. And every time he stayed, the next time got a little easier. One evening in the backyard, watching the dogs while the sun painted the sky its usual Arizona masterpiece of copper and violet, Sienna leaned into Tony's shoulder and said something that had been on her mind for a while. "Have you ever thought about having kids?" Tony was quiet for a moment. Not the old silence, not the defensive shutdown. Just a man thinking about something important before answering. "Yeah, I have. I used to think that part of my life was over, that I'd had my shot and it didn't work out. But lately with you, I've been thinking about it differently." "Differently how?" "Like maybe I'd actually be good at it, if I had the right person beside me." Sienna tilted her head up to look at him. "You'd be a wonderful father, Tony." "I hope so. I know so." He kissed the top of her head, and they sat together watching the dogs chase each other through the fading light, and neither of them needed to say anything more. Tony proposed on a Sunday afternoon at the dog park, not the fancy restaurant, not the golf course, not some exotic location designed to look good in photographs. The dog park, their dog park, the same patch of scrubby Arizona grass where Champ had first chased Princess in circles, where Tony had made terrible jokes about dating apps and dogs in heat, where Sienna had waited for him with a patience he still wasn't sure he deserved. He'd thought about doing it somewhere grand. He'd even asked Carlos for advice, and Carlos had said the same thing Sienna would have said. Do it somewhere that means something, not somewhere that looks impressive. So on a warm Sunday afternoon, almost exactly 12 months after a blonde woman had sat down next to him in a golf club restaurant and turned his carefully constructed world of solitude completely inside out, Tony knelt down on the grass with a ring his mother had helped him pick out during their Thanksgiving visit and asked Sienna to marry him. Champ and Princess were about 30 yards away, doing their usual routine, chasing, playing, being ridiculous, completely oblivious to the fact that their owners were making a decision that would determine the rest of all their lives. "Are you serious right now?" Sienna said, her hand over her mouth, her eyes filling. "I've never been more serious about anything. We're at a dog park, Tony." "Yeah, we are, because this is where I figured out I was falling in love with you. This is where it all started. You're going to make me cry in front of all these dogs. Is that a yes?" Sienna pulled him to his feet, took his face in both hands, and kissed him in a way that answered the question more thoroughly than words ever could. "Yes," she said against his mouth. "Obviously yes. 1,000 times yes." Champ and Princess, sensing the commotion, came bounding over and proceeded to knock both of them off their feet, resulting in the newly engaged couple lying on the grass laughing while two very excited dogs licked their faces and trampled their clothes. It was not elegant. It was not cinematic. It was perfect. They were married 8 weeks later because neither of them saw the point in a long engagement. Tony had spent 8 years waiting to live his life. He was done waiting. The ceremony was small, held in the backyard of Jack and Kristen's new house, which had a garden that Kristen had spent months cultivating for exactly this type of occasion, even if she'd never admit that out loud. 40 guests. White chairs on green grass. String lights overhead that would matter more once the sun went down. Carlos stood beside Tony as his best man. This time, the man standing at his brother's shoulder was someone who'd never betray him. Someone who'd watched Tony fall apart and waited for 8 long years for him to put himself back together. Kristen stood beside Sienna. And in the second row, Carmen Delgado sat between her husband Ray and Greg, Sienna's father, both families side by side. 2 people who'd lost spouses finding comfort in watching their children find each other. Marco was there too, with Vanessa beside him, the nurse from the dog park, wearing a suit that he'd clearly bought for the occasion and looking more grown-up than anyone had ever seen him. Even JR was present, lying under Marco's chair with the resigned patience of a small dog who'd long accepted that his humans were insane. Champ and Princess sat at the front, on either side of the aisle, each wearing a collar threaded with white flowers that Sienna had made herself at the florist the day before. They sat remarkably still for the ceremony, almost as if they understood what was happening, or maybe they were just tired from running all morning. Either way, they looked beautiful. When Tony said his vows, he kept them simple. He wasn't a man of elaborate speeches, and Sienna didn't need him to be. "I spent a long time believing that the best parts of my life were behind me," he said. "That I'd used up my one shot at being happy, and that was it. You proved me wrong. You were patient when I didn't deserve it, honest when I needed it, and you never once gave up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that." Sienna's vows were shorter. "You are the best man I've ever known. And I'm going to spend every day reminding you of that because I know you still forget sometimes." The small crowd laughed. Tony laughed too. And then they were married, and the man who'd spent 8 years convinced that love was something that happened to other people was now standing in a garden with a ring on his finger and a wife who loved him exactly as he was, scarred, imperfect, and finally fully home. Their first son was born the following spring. Tony was in the delivery room when it happened. He'd told himself he was ready. He'd prepared. He'd read the books, gone to the classes, built the crib with his own hands using wood he'd selected personally, because that's what carpenters do. They build things right. But when the nurse placed his son in his arms for the first time, nothing he'd prepared for mattered. The baby was small, warm, impossibly light, with dark hair and a scrunched-up face and tiny fingers that wrapped around Tony's thumb with a grip that seemed too strong for something so new. Tony looked down at his son and felt the world shift on its axis. This was his child, his blood, his son. No question, no doubt, no secret waiting to shatter everything. Just a father holding his boy for the first time, overwhelmed by a love so immediate and so fierce that it made everything else Every wound, every betrayal, every wasted year feels small by comparison. For one brief moment, Diego flickered through his mind. Not with pain this time, not with anger. Just a quiet thought about a dark-haired boy he'd once loved who was growing up somewhere in California without him. Tony hoped he was happy. He hoped Santiago had become a good father. He hoped Diego had a life full of people who loved him honestly. Then his newborn son made a sound, a soft, hiccuping cry, and Tony was back in the room, back in the present, back in the life he'd built with the woman lying in the hospital bed beside him, exhausted and radiant and watching him with those blue eyes that had seen through every wall he'd ever constructed. "He looks like you," Sienna said. "Poor kid. Stop it, he's beautiful." "Yeah." Tony's voice was thick. "He really is." They named him Mateo. After Mateo came Lucas, then Daniel, and finally their daughter, Sophia, 4 children in 6 years. The house that Tony had once shared with Marco expanded through renovations that Tony and Carlos did themselves over several long weekends, adding rooms and deck space, and a bigger yard that became the domain of dogs and children in roughly equal measure. Champ and Princess grew old together in that yard. They had 2 litters of the most ridiculous-looking puppies anyone had ever seen, Doberman bodies with golden retriever temperaments, or golden retriever fluff with Doberman intensity. They kept one from each litter. The kids named them Rocket and Daisy. Sunday mornings at Stone Creek became a family tradition. Tony and Sienna played with Jack and Kristen. Marco brought Vanessa, whom he'd eventually married in a ceremony that was significantly louder and significantly less organized than Tony's. Carlos came when Jenna let him off parenting duty. The kids ran around the clubhouse restaurant, causing the kind of cheerful destruction that only a group of children who have grown up together can produce. Summers meant barbecues in the backyard. Christmases meant flights to Sacramento, the house overflowing with family. Weekday mornings meant Tony kissing Sienna goodbye before heading to the site, and coming home each evening to a house full of noise and dog hair and children's drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, and knowing, every single time he walked through that door, that everything on the other side of it was real. Every bit of it, his. Tony never forgot what Rosa and Santiago did to him. He never pretended it didn't happen, never rewrote the past into something softer than it was. But he stopped letting it define him. The scar was there, the way scars are visible if you looked but no longer bleeding. Just a mark on a man who'd survived something that could have broken him permanently, and chose instead to build something better on the other side of it. And in Sienna, he found everything he'd once believed he'd lost forever. A partner, a best friend, a woman who loved him not despite his damage but with full knowledge of it, who'd waited for him when he wasn't ready and stood beside him when he was, who'd given him a family that was unshakably, unmistakably his own. Antonio Ramirez spent the rest of his life with that woman and those children, in that house with its too small kitchen and its too big yard, surrounded by friends who'd become family and dogs who'd started a dynasty. He spent the rest of his days exactly where he wanted to be. And he was happy, truly, deeply, all the way to the end. Happy.